All right, Gryffindor leads 80 points to 0. And look at that firebolt go! Potter's really putting it through the paces now. We turn to, Chang's Comet is just no match for it. Oh, the firebolt's precision balance. Oh, it's really noticeable on these long. Jordan, are you being paid to advertise firebolts? Get on with the commentary. Ravenclaw was pulling back. They had now scored 3 goals, which Gryffindor only 50 points ahead. If Chew got the snitch before him, Ravenclaw would win. Harry dropped lower, narrowly avoiding a Ravenclaw chaser, scanning the field frantically. A glint of gold, a flutter of tiny wings. The snitch was circling the Gryffindor goalpost. Harry accelerated, his eyes on the speck of gold ahead, but just then Chew appeared out of thin air, blocking him. Harry, this is no time to be a gentleman, Wood roared. Harry swerved to avoid the collision. Knock her off her broom! You have to! If you have to. Harry turned and caught sight of Chew, who was grinning. The snitch had vanished again. Harry turned the firebolt upward and was soon 20 feet above the game. Out of the corner of her eye, he saw Chew following him. She decided to mark him rather than search for the snitch herself. All right, then. If she wanted to tail him, she'd have to take the consequences. He dived again. Chew, thinking he'd seen the snitch, tried to follow. Harry pulled out of the dive sharply, hurled her downward, and he rose fast as a bullet once more. Then he saw, for the third time, the snitch was glittering way above the field at the Ravenclaw end. He accelerated so many feet below, so did Chew. He was winning and grinning the snitch with every second. Then, oh! Screamed Chew, pointing. Distracted Harry looked down. 3 Dementors, still tall, black-hooded Dementors, were looking at him. He didn't stop to think. Plunging his hand down out of his robes, he whipped out his wand and roared, Expecto Patronum! Something silvery white, something enormous, erupted from the end of his wand, and he knew it had shot directly at the Dementors. And he didn't pause to watch. His mind was miraculously clear, and he looked ahead. He was nearly there. He stretched out the hand and grasped his hand just to snatch close fingers around the small, struggling snitch. Madame's hooch whistle sound. Harry turned around in midair and saw 6 scarlet bearing down on him. Next moment, the whole team was hugging him so hard he was nearly pulled off his broom. Down below, he could hear the roars of the Gryffindor's crowd. That's my boy! Wood kept yelling. Alicia, Angelina, and Katie had all kissed Harry. Fred had him in a grip and so tight that Harry felt as though his head would come off. In complete disarray, the team managed to make its way back to the ground. Harry got off his broom and looked up to see the gaggle of Gryffindor supporters on the field, Ron in the lead. Before he knew it, he had been engulfed by the crowd cheering, Yes! Ron yelled, yanking Harry into his arms in the air. Yes! Yes! Well done, Harry! Said Percy, looking delighted. 10 galleons to me! Oh, must find Penelope, excuse me. Good for you, Harry, roared Seamus Finnegan. Roddy, brilliant! Boomed Hagrid over the heads of the milling Gryffindors. That was quite a Patronus, said a voice in Harry's ear, and he turned around to see Professor Lupin, who looked both shaken and pleased. The Dementors didn't affect me at all, Harry said excitedly. I didn't feel a thing. That would be because they weren't Dementors, said Professor Lupin. Come and see. He led Harry out to the crowd until they were able to see the edge of the field. You gave Mr. Malfoy quite a fright, said Lupin. Harry stared. Lying in the crumpled heap on the ground were Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, and Malchus Flint. The Slytherin team captain all struggled to move themselves from long, black-hooded robes. It looked as though Malfoy had been standing on Goyle's shoulders, standing over them, with an expression of utmost fury on her face, was Professor McGonagall. An unworthy trick, she was shouting. A low and cowardly attempt to sabotage a Gryffindor seeker. Detention to all of you. And 50 points from Slytherin. I shall be speaking to Professor Dumbledore about this. Make no mistake. Here he comes now. If anything could have set the seal of Gryffindor's victory, it was this. Ron, who had fought his way through Harry's sides, doubled up with laughter as they watched Malfoy fighting to extricate himself from the robe, Goyle's head still stuck inside it. "Come on, Harry," said George, fighting his way over. "Party! Gryffindor Common Room! Now!" "Right," said Harry, feeling happier than he had in ages. He and the rest of the team led the way, still in their scarlet robes, and the stadium was back up at the castle. It felt as though they had already won. In the Quidditch Cup, the party went on all day and well into the night, and Fred and George Weasley disappeared in a couple hours and returned with handfuls of bottles of butterbeers, pumpkin fizz, and several bags full of honeydew sweets. "How'd you do that?" squealed Angelina Johnson, and George started throwing peppermint toads into the crowd, with a little help from Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. Fred muttered in Harry's ear. Only one person wasn't joining the festivities. Hermione, incredibly, was sitting in the corner, attempting to read an enormous book called Home Life and the Habits of British Muggles. Harry broke away from the table of Fred and George and started juggling butterbeer bottles when he went over to her. "Did you even come to the match?" he asked her. "Of course I did," said Hermione, strangely high-pitched voice, not looking up. "Well, and I'm very glad we won, and I do think you did very well, but I need to read this by Monday." "Come on, Hermione. Come have some food," Harry said, looking over at Ron, wondering whether he was in a good enough mood to bury the hatchet. "I can't, Harry. I've got 422 pages to read." And Hermione, now sounding slightly hysterical. "Anyway," she glanced over to Ron, too, "he doesn't want me over there to join in." There was no arguing with this, and Ron chose that moment to say loudly, "If Scabbers hadn't been eaten, he could have had some of those fudge flies. He used to really like them." Hermione burst into tears. Before Harry could say or do anything, she tucked her enormous book under her arm, still sobbing, and ran up the staircase to the girl dormitories out of sight. "Can't you give her a break?" Harry asked Ron quietly. "No," said Ron flatly. "If she just acted like she was sorry. But she'll never admit she was wrong, Hermione. She's still acting as if Scabbers has gone on vacation or something." The Gryffindor party ended only when Professor McGonagall turned up in her tartan dressing gowns and her hairnet at 1 in the morning to insist that they all go to bed. Harry and Ron climbed up the stairs to the dormitory, still discussing the match. At last, and exhausted, Harry climbed into bed, twitched the hangings of his four-poster shut, and to block out the ray of moonlight that lay back, and felt himself almost instantly drifting to sleep. He had a very strange dream. He was walking through the forest, his firebolt over his shoulder, following something silvery white. It was winding its way through the trees ahead, and he could only catch glimpses of it between the leaves. Anxious to catch up with it, he sped up and moved faster, and so did Quarry. Harry broke into a run, and then ahead he heard hooves gathering speed. Now he was running flat out, and ahead he could hear galloping. Then he turned around into a clearing, and no! Harry suddenly woke as though he'd been hit in the face. Disorientated in the total darkness, he fumbled for his hangings. He could hear movements around him, Seamus Finnegan's voice, and the others from the side of the room. "What's going on?" Harry thought he heard dormitory door slam. At last, finding he divided the curtains, he ripped them back, and there, at the same moment, Dean Thomas was lit his lamp. Ron was sitting up in bed, hangings torn from one side and to the utmost hair of his face. "Black! Sirius Black! With a knife! What? Here, just now, slashed the curtain, woke me up." You sure you weren't dreaming, Ron?" said Dean. "Look at the curtains! I tell you, he was here." They all scrambled out of bed. Harry reached for the dormitory door, burst and sprinted back down to the staircase. Doors opened behind him, and sleepy voices called out after them. Who shouted? What are you doing? The common room was lit with a glow of dying fire. Still littered with the debris from the party, it was deserted. Are you sure you weren't dreaming, Ron? I'm telling you, I saw him. What's all that noise? Professor McGonagall told us to go to bed. A few of the girls had come down the staircase, pulling their dressing gowns on and yawning. Boys, too, were reappearing. Excellent. Are we carrying on? Said Fred and George brightly. Everyone, back upstairs, said Percy, hurrying into the common room and pinning his head boy badge on his pajamas as he spoke. Pierce, Sirius Black, Sirius Black, said Ron faintly. In our dormitory with a knife. Woke me up. The common room went very still. Nonsense, said Percy, looking startled. You had too much to eat, Ron. You had a nightmare. I'm telling you. Now, really, enough is enough. Professor McGonagall was back. She slammed the portrait behind her and entered the common room and stared furiously around. I'm delighted that Gryffindor won the match, but this is getting ridiculous. Percy, I expect better of you. I certainly didn't authorize this, Professor, said Percy, puffing himself up dignitely. I was just telling them to all go back to bed. My brother Ron had a nightmare. It wasn't a nightmare, Ron yelled. Professor, I woke up and Sirius Black was standing over me holding a knife. Professor McGonagall stared at him. Don't be ridiculous, Weasley. How could that possibly have gotten through the portrait hole? Ask him, said Ron, pointing shaking finger at Sir Cadogan's picture. Ask him if he saw... Glaring suspiciously at Ron, Professor McGonagall pushed the portrait back open, went outside, and the whole common room listened, and with bated breath. Sir Cadogan, did you let a man enter Gryffindor Tower? Certainly, good lady, Sir Cadogan said. There was a stunned silence, both inside and outside the common room. You did, said Professor McGonagall, but the password, he had him, said Sir Cadogan proudly. He had the whole week's, my lady. Read him off like a little piece of paper. Professor McGonagall pulled herself back through the portrait hole, stunned the crowd. She was white as chalk. Which person, she said, her voice shaking, which abysmally foolish person wrote down the week's password and left them lying around? There was utter silence, broken by the smallest of terrified squeaks of Neville Longbottom, traveling from head to fluffy slippered toes, raised his hand slowly in the air.